Every year, weeds take more from your garden than you think. They take your money first. Sprays, weed killers, plastic barriers, tools, refills, and somehow, the weeds still come back. Then they take your soil. To win it back, you pour chemicals along the rows and around the plants you are trying to grow. The garden looks clean for a while, but underneath, the same problem is still waiting. And finally, they take your body. You bend down again, your back starts aching, your knees get stiff, and you pull the same weeds from the same places, week after week, like the garden is punishing you for trying. But what if the problem is not that you are not working hard enough? What if your garden is being set up to grow weeds? Every time soil is turned over or left bare, sleeping weed seeds get another chance to wake up. These 7 forgotten methods do not fight weeds after they grow. They stop weeds before they start. Method 7 is a hidden army that works while you sleep. And Method 6 may already be sitting in your garage right now. Before any of these methods make sense, there is one rule behind all 7. You do not beat weeds by killing them. You beat them by building a garden where they cannot get started in the first place. Think about why the weed killer business is worth more than $30 billion. Like anything you have to keep rebuying, it only profits when the problem keeps coming back. A spray that ended weeds for good would be a terrible product. So every spring, the bottles come off the shelf, the weeds return, and the cycle pays for itself. The people who quietly stepped off that cycle, including traditional low-input growers in Amish communities, understood something simpler. Weeds need 2 things to take over: a wake-up call for the seeds buried in your soil, and bare, open ground to grow into. Take away either one, and many weeds never get the chance. This is not about a perfect, weed-free garden. It is about breaking the weekly weeding cycle for good. And it starts with the one habit most gardeners are proudest of, the very thing that may be waking up thousands of weeds before the season even begins. Method 1. Stop tilling your soil. Every spring, the rototiller comes out. The soil gets turned into dark, fluffy rows, and the garden looks perfect. 2 weeks later, a carpet of green covers everything. It feels like bad luck. It is not. It is cause and effect. Underneath your garden is what scientists call the weed seed bank, and it is bigger than almost anyone guesses. In heavily worked agricultural soil, researchers have counted anywhere from a few hundred to nearly 15,000 viable weed seeds in a single square foot. A typical garden bed usually sits lower, often a few thousand, but even that is far more than enough to cover a bed in green. The point holds: the weeds are already there, waiting, and they wait a long time. Many weed seeds stay alive in the soil for 5, 10, even 20 years or more. In one experiment started back in 1879, buried seeds still sprouted after more than 140 years underground. You may be fighting weeds today that were dropped into your soil before you ever moved in. So what wakes them up? Turning the soil. Every pass of the tiller does more than expose seeds to a flash of light. It stirs in air, releases a pulse of nitrates, and swings the temperature up and down, and to a sleeping seed. That is every signal it has been waiting for. The cleaner you make the surface look, the more weeds you invite up from below. So the rule for Method 1 is simple. Stop tilling an established bed every single year. If the soil is already loose and alive, leave it be. You are not turning soil, you are turning on weeds. But if you stop tilling, what do you do instead? That is Method 2. Method 2, build on top with compost. Instead of digging the soil up, you build on top of it. Each spring, lay 2 to 3 inches of finished compost right on the surface of the bed, and let the earthworms and soil life carry it downward for you. No turning, no digging. You add from above, and the garden does the mixing underground. It is like feeding the bed from the top, instead of tearing it open every spring. That layer of compost does 2 jobs at the same time. First, it keeps the buried seed bank in the dark, so the seeds that need a trigger never get one. Second, it forms a surface layer that makes it much harder for new seeds blowing in from above to root and take hold. That 2 to 3 inch layer becomes a blanket of darkness between the buried seeds and the sunlight they are waiting for. And this is the part most people miss. This is not a soil program and a weed program. It is one program. To a traditional grower, feeding the soil and stopping weeds were never 2 separate jobs. Building richer soil is exactly what keeps the weeds down. By now you have stopped waking the seed bank, but that only handles the weeds hiding below. Method 3 deals with the empty weeks between crops, the time when weeds usually move in and take over. Method 3. Let cover crops do the weeding for you. Here is a question most gardeners never ask. What is growing in your beds during the weeks when nothing else is? For most of us, the answer is weeds. Bare soil between crops is an open invitation, and weeds always show up to the party. But traditional growers fill that empty time on purpose with plants that crowd weeds out and feed the soil at the same time. These are called cover crops, and two of them do most of the work. The first is cereal rye. Think of it as a winter blanket for your beds. You sow it in late summer or early fall, right after you clear out your summer crops, while the bed would otherwise sit empty and exposed all winter. Rye grows fast, survives hard freezes, and does something clever underground. Its roots and decaying leaves release natural compounds that make it harder for small weed seeds to sprout nearby. It is not a miracle. On its own, rye typically holds back small-seeded weeds by somewhere between 30 and 80% for about a month, and it does little against large-seeded weeds. But that is a real head start, working quietly through the coldest months of the year. In spring, you cut the rye down at the soil line and leave it lying there as a thick mat. One important rule: wait about 10 days after cutting before you plant into it, because fresh rye residue can hold back your own seedlings too, and for tiny seeds like carrots or onions, wait a little longer. The second cover crop is buckwheat, and this one is your summer gap filler. When a bed opens up between a spring crop and a fall crop, buckwheat moves in fast. It is ready to cut in about 35 to 40 days, and its broad leaves close over the soil in just 3 to 4 weeks, shading out weeds before they ever get going. Cut it down before it sets seed, though let it flower too long, and the buckwheat itself becomes your next weed. And the key thing to understand about both of these is simple. You are not planting them alongside your vegetables. They go in when the bed is empty, and they come out before your main crop goes in. Used at the right time, they do not compete with the food you are growing. The real cost is just a packet of seed, a little patience, and sometimes pushing the next planting back a week or two. That covers the empty weeks. But what about the weeds that are already primed to sprout the moment you do plant? That is what Method 4 is built to stop. Method 4. Trap the weeds before you plant. This one sounds almost too simple to work, and it is one of the oldest tricks in the book. It is called a stale seed bed, and it is essentially a trap. Here is how it works. You prepare a bed exactly as if you were about to plant, rake it smooth, water it well, and then you do nothing. You walk away and wait. Over the next 7 to 14 days, the weed seeds near the surface get everything they need: moisture, warmth, the signal to grow. So they grow. A whole flush of tiny weed seedlings comes up, thinking it is their moment. And that is exactly what you want. Because while those seedlings are still small and tender, you go back and kill that entire generation at once, not by digging, but by shaving them off right at the surface with a sharp hoe, or scorching them with a flame weeder. The key is to barely disturb the soil. If you dig deep, you just drag up a fresh batch of buried seeds and start the problem all over again. Skim the top, take out the seedlings, and leave the seed bank below undisturbed. Why does this matter so much? Because every weed you kill now, before it can flower and drop seed, is thousands of future weeds that will simply never exist. You invited them up early and ended them before they mattered. Do this once or twice before planting, and in good conditions it can cut the first waves of weeds in that bed by half to 2/3. One honest note: this works best for beds you plant from seed beans, carrots, beets where you are starting with open ground. For transplants like tomatoes and peppers, you will lean on the other methods more. The traditional growers never relied on a single trick anyway. They layered them. So far, every method has gone after the weed seed bank before your vegetables even begin. But once your crop is in the ground, the rule changes. From that point on, whatever shades the soil first wins, and that is exactly what Method 5 is about. Method 5. Never leave the soil bare. Look closely at a traditional garden, and you will notice something. There is almost no bare ground. The beds are packed plants close together, low cover between the rows, every inch either growing food or growing something useful. And that is not crowding by accident. It is the whole strategy. Remember the rule. Weeds are nature's way of covering open soil. Leave a patch of ground bare, and nature will fill it with whatever seeds are nearby, which, in most gardens, means weeds. So old-time gardeners beat nature to it. If the ground is going to be covered no matter what, they cover it first, with something they actually chose. The simplest version is just spacing your plants closer together, so their leaves meet and shade the soil early in the season. Once that canopy closes, there is no sunlight left for a weed seedling to use. The crop itself becomes the weed barrier. The next step up is a living mulch, a low, ground-hugging plant grown between your taller crops. White clover is the classic choice. It stays short, it pulls nitrogen from the air into the soil, and it forms a dense carpet that crowds out weed seedlings. But here is where you have to be honest, because this is oversold all the time. White clover is not magic fertilizer. The nitrogen it captures mostly becomes available later, as the clover tissue dies back and breaks down, not the moment you plant it. And in a dry summer, that thick green carpet competes with your vegetables for water. If you are not watering enough, the living mulch you planted to help can actually hold your crop back. So clover works best when it is managed, mowed, or trimmed to keep it low and where there is enough moisture to go around. Used that way, it covers the ground, feeds the soil, and quietly suppresses weeds all at once. So far, everything has been about plants, what you grow, when you grow it, how close together. But the most popular method of all is not a plant at all. It is something flat, free, and probably sitting in your garage right now. Method 6. Block the light with cardboard. This is the one people share with every gardener they know, because it costs almost nothing and works in so many gardens. When traditional and no-dig growers prepare a bed, they take plain, flattened cardboard boxes, lay them flat over the soil, overlap the edges, wet them down, and cover them with a few inches of mulch. That is the whole thing, a layer of cardboard and some mulch. And here is what makes it work. When you overlap the edges properly, cardboard blocks almost all of the light reaching the soil. Every seed in that buried seed bank just lost its trigger. No light, no signal, no sprouting at least. That is what happens when the seams are overlapped and the layer stays covered. You did not poison them. You simply switched them off. And unlike plastic landscape fabric, which suffocates the soil and lets weeds root on top of it within a season or two, cardboard usually breaks down within a season or so depending on moisture, thickness, and climate, and feeds the earthworms while it disappears. Now, this is a modern tool, not an ancient one. Cardboard boxes did not exist centuries ago. What is old is the principle blocking light to smother weeds, and it was popularized for home gardens by Ruth Stout back in the 1950s. The cardboard is just the cheapest, easiest version of a very old idea. Let me deal with the 3 things people always worry about, because the worries are fair. First, chemicals. Most plain brown corrugated cardboard is low risk when you use it correctly, but do not treat every box as garden safe. Use plain brown cardboard. Pull off the plastic tape, the staples, and the shipping labels. And skip anything glossy, waxed, heavily printed in color, or coated to resist grease. Those are the ones to leave out. Second, nitrogen. You may have heard cardboard steals nitrogen from the soil. That is only really true if you till it in and mix it down into the dirt. Laid flat on the surface as a sheet, any nitrogen tie-up stays right at that thin contact layer. To stay safe, lay a thin layer of nitrogen-rich material compost or grass clippings under the cardboard before you cover it. Third, and most important, this does not kill every weed. Cardboard is excellent on young weeds and seeds sprouting from below. But if you leave a gap, persistent weeds will find the light and push through. And against tough perennials that spread by underground roots, bindweed, Bermuda grass, nutsedge, running bamboo, plain cardboard will lose. Those store enough energy underground to punch straight through a decomposing sheet. For weeds like that, you need much heavier, much longer coverage, digging or solarizing the soil first. Honest expectations here will save you a wasted season. One more practical question people ask: what lives under the cardboard? The answer is a lot, and most of it helps. Earthworms, ground beetles, spiders, even snakes that hunt rodents all move in, and they work for you. But the same damp, dark shelter can attract slugs, voles, and ants, which do not. So keep a 3 to 4 inch gap of clear soil around the base of your plants, and wrap young tree trunks in hardware cloth to protect them. To put it down, overlap the edges by 6 to 8 inches. Soak it thoroughly so it molds to the ground and won't blow away. Top it with about 3 inches of mulch, and cut an X wherever you want to plant. Just don't pile it on so thick that water and air can't reach the soil underneath. You have now covered the soil from above. The The seventh and final method protects it from below with help you cannot even see. Method 7. Protect the army that weeds for free. This is the hidden army from the very beginning, and it really does work while you sleep. Down at the soil surface, especially at night, there are insects quietly eating weed seeds before those seeds ever get the chance to sprout. The main workers are ground beetles, along with crickets, ants, and other small seed eaters. They patrol the surface, find fallen weed seeds, and consume them for free every night without being asked. How much of a difference can that make? More than you would expect. In some field studies, these seed eaters removed a large share of the weed seeds sitting on the soil surface in one study of undisturbed soil, around 40% over the fall alone. That is a large share of next year's weeds removed before a single one could grow. But there is a catch. These helpers only show up if your garden gives them a home. And almost everything in this video has been quietly building that home already. Remember the cardboard from Method 6? Its ridged, hollow structure is the perfect daytime shelter for ground beetles and spiders. The mulch, the cover crop residue, the fact that you stop tilling all of it, gives these predators the cover and moisture they need to live and hunt. Tilling does the opposite. It destroys their shelter and buries weed seeds down deep, out of their reach, where the seeds stay safe for years. Broad-spectrum insecticides are just as bad. They kill the pests and your weed-eating allies in the same spray. So protecting this army is mostly about what you stop doing. Stop tilling. Keep the soil covered through the season with mulch or residue, and put down the broad insecticides. Do that, and a workforce you never hired shows up to eat your weeds every single night. And that is the real secret. These 7 methods are not 7 separate tricks. They are one system, each part feeding the next. Step back and look at what you have built. You stop tilling, so the seed bank stays asleep. You layer compost on top, so the soil feeds itself instead of feeding weeds. You fill the empty weeks with cover crops that crowd weeds out. You trap the first flush of weeds and end it before you plant. You keep the ground covered with close spacing and living mulch, so there is no bare soil left to claim. You lay cardboard where you need a clean barrier, and you protect the insects that quietly eat weed seeds at the soil surface. Pull any one of these out, and the rest still work. Put them all together, and you have something close to weed-resistant, not from a bottle, but from the way the whole garden is set up. The old idea behind all of it is simple. Stop fighting weeds, and build a garden where they cannot compete in the first place. Be clear about what this is and what it is not. It will not give you a spotless, weed-free garden. Nothing will. But it can take weeding from a back-breaking weekly chore down to the occasional 5-minute pass with no herbicides and almost nothing to buy. For most gardeners, that is the difference between dreading the season and enjoying it again. So here is the real question. Which method are you going to try first? Drop it in the comments whether it is skipping the tiller this spring or finally putting that pile of cardboard boxes to use. And if you want more forgotten methods like these, the kind that quietly work while everyone else is still spraying, stay subscribed. There are more coming.